spoken word. Okay. The next story from spoken word, from the honey thief in spoken word, is the snow leopard.
Aha. He came to Hazara from England in the time of the communists when Afghanistan was upside down. His true name was Abraham, like that of the patriarch in the Holy Book. But in Hazarajad, he was called Dobara, short for Dobara Kahajik Kamid, which means try again in our language of Dari.
That's an interesting name they gave him.
Mhm.
When he first arrived in Hazarajat on his great project, he brought with him 3 cameras. One camera made things a great distance away appear close enough to seize with your 2 hands. The children of the village in which he made his home for 3 months were permitted to look through the camera, and they thanked God for sending the Englishmen to Hazarajat. Equally as strange was another camera that took a picture that made it into a shape immediately. Every person in the village, except for the most pious, who said the camera was unholy, was given a picture to keep. Some chose to stand at their own front door for their picture. Some stood beside the animals they owned.
Aha, Dobara came to Hazarajat not to take pictures of people, but to take pictures of snow leopards for a university in the city of London. The university paid him a salary to take such pictures, something that seemed very curious to the people of the village. Dobara explained that few pictures of the snow leopard had ever been taken, and that it was important to take as many as possible. He was told, when you make a picture, show us, for no one in the village had ever seen the animal. In any case, few were interested. Dobara spent nearly all of his time in Hazarazad answering questions about the machines of England and the tall buildings of his city.
On that first visit to Hazarajat, Dobara spoke only the English of his own land and the second language spoken by the Jews. He himself was of the Jews, but the Jews of England. The strangest thing of all was that he did not have his God in his heart. He said that the world made itself. People thought he must be simple, like Jawad Basudi of another time, who said that the world was a dream. Jawad Basudi made a journey to Bamayan and changed his faith to that of the Buddhists, which was better than nothing.
With his English and his few words of Dari and pictures in the book, Dobara went to one person and another all over the north of Hazarajat, seeking the snow leopard. In the village in which he lived in his tent, the snow leopard was a mystery, as I have said. In other places, people told him that the animal lived much higher in the mountains than the Hazarajat. He asked to be taken to higher places where the snow stayed on the ground for 9 months of the year, or higher still, where the snow covered the mountains every day of the year. No one would take him, not even for 10,000 Afghanis. It was too dangerous. Those who had been there told of winds that could lift the snow from the ground and throw it with the force of stones. Also, the airplanes of the Russians flew over the mountains and people were frightened of them. The Russians were said to have Afghans,
To hate.
hate Afghans, those who had no war with them and those who did. Even on foot, they never left Afghans in peace. From an airplane, who knows? They might drop a bomb on anyone, even those watching for a snow leopard.
It was at the end of his first year in Hazarajat that Dobara became Dobara. He said, I'll come in the spring and try again. Try again, that's how he got his name. In spring, the shepherds took their animals to the mountains for the new grass. Someone had told Dobara that snow leopards came down from the high mountains in spring to eat the sheep and goats of the Hazara. Maybe the person who told him that was being kind, or maybe he was mad. A wolf might eat a sheep, or an eagle might take a lamb just born and still covered in blood. Or sometimes a ram in a bad mood will put his head down and hurt the lambs and yeah, and butt the lambs away from the ewes. But Hazara, who had been shepherds all their lives, had no stories of snow leopards hunting their animals.
He came back in spring, as he said he would. His arrival brought two surprises for the people of the village. The first was that Dobara had taught himself many more words of Dari. And the second was his beard, long and black. His beard and his Dari earned him even more respect than his camera. He had changed his spectacles too. He now saw through small, round spectacles, like those that Nadir Shah had worn many years before when he was shot by the king killer Abdul Khalik. Dobara brought presents as well, not for everyone in the village, but for the chief, Saeed Ali, and for Saeed Ali's three wives, and for Mohammed Majid, the scholar, who had read a book about the moon out of interest. Others in the village were pleased with the music he played for them on a machine, the same songs many had heard on the BBC station of Saeed Ali's radio before it was destroyed by ants. More welcome than any other gifts were Dobara's medicines, especially the aspirin for the terrible headaches of Mohammed Majid's daughter that the apothecary's medicines could not banish. And for Ali Hassan's backache that came from losing one of his legs when he stood on a landmine on the road to Kabul. Ali Hassan was also suffering from decayed teeth. He was suing a dentist for removing his good teeth and leaving the bad ones. A waste of time, the lawsuit, for the dentist had fled to Kandahar, where it was not illegal to make mistakes.
Dobara was respected too for showing that he was a serious man. On his first visit, his ambition had seemed foolish. A snow leopard is not an important creature in anyone's life in Hazarajat. But if Dobara was prepared to return all the way from his city of London with his cameras, he deserved to be taken seriously. For this reason, a man who had not been in Hazarajat on Dobara's first visit came forward on the second visit. His name was Muhammad Hussein Anwari, and he lived in the ancient city of Herat in the northwest. He was a man in the middle of his years and now made his living hiring out diesel generators. But as a much younger man, he had lived further north and hunted with his father. He had heard of the Englishman from a cousin in Hazarajat, a cousin he was visiting.
The first meeting of Dobara and Mohammed Hussein Anwari was a great shock to the Englishman. He asked Mohammed Hussein if he'd seen any snow leopards with his own eyes. And Mohammed Hussein said, "Yes, I've seen many, and I have shot 10. Killed 10, said Dobara. "Yes," said Mohammed Hussein. "Bears too, ibex, many red foxes." "But snow leopards," said Dobara. It was difficult for him to master the words of Dari. He needed to show his distress. "Why the snow leopards? There are very few."
Mohammed Hussein was not an ignorant man. He knew that people from countries such as the England of this Ibrahim Dobara thought highly of the leopards. Indeed, he thought highly of them himself. But at the time he was hunting, the cost of a snow leopard would bring $200 American from a merchant in Iran. And there was more money in smaller sums for the paws, the bones, even the teeth of the animal, prized by doctors in China. It was the coat of the snow leopard that had permitted Mohammed Hussein to start his diesel generator business in Herat.
Mohammed Hussein said to Dobara, "I would not kill them now." Dobara told his story to Mohammed Hussein. He showed him the cameras he had brought with him from his university. He said that he would pay Mohammed Hussein 10 English pounds each day to help him find a snow leopard. 10 English pounds was a good sum of money in Afghanis, but not enough, for Mohammed Hussein would be away from his business for 2 weeks. He said he would have to ask for 100 American dollars each day. This was more than Dobara could afford. He said he would talk to the people who controlled money at his university and come back in the late summer. But first he wanted to know if there was a good chance of finding a snow leopard.
By this time, Muhammad Hussein had come to like the Englishman, who knew so little about anything and next to nothing about snow leopards. He could see that Dobara was earnest, although foolish, and so he began the Englishman's education, taking care with his words so that Dobara could follow him. This is what he said. The snow leopard is a wild creature. He does not want to be seen by you. He does not want to be seen by me. If he could, he would kill you because he hates you. He hates your shape. He hates your smell. He hates the sound of your voice. Nothing he sees in a whole year makes as much hate in him as you or me. But he fears you too, and if he sees you, he will hide or run. He will not attack you. Even as he runs, he's thinking, what is this mad thing on 2 straight legs? Let it be struck dead by God. Many years ago, a man came here from Turkey, where everyone is Sunni. He was a scholar like you, but a scholar of poetry. He came for a holiday to Hazara because his brother-in-law was Hazara and had told him how beautiful it is in the summer. He had heard of the snow leopard too, and he hoped to see one. It was not possible, as he had only 2 weeks to spend amongst us. To tell you the truth, I did not want to find him a leopard at all. I could see that he wanted to show his love to the creature, and he hoped that the creature would show him love in return. No such thing is possible, not with a snow leopard, not with a bear, not with a red fox, not even with a marmot. They love freedom, Mr. Abraham. Do you understand? When they see a man like you or me, they see the opposite of freedom. That's the truth. We are not to blame. God did not give us the same freedom as the snow leopard. That is what they smell on us, the leopards, the bears, the red foxes. They smell that we are not free. It fills them with hatred and fear.
The Englishman, try again, returned in late summer with the money to pay Mohammed Hussein Anwari and with the equipment that the hunter had told him to bring with him. Once again, Dobara thought to bring presents for the village and medicines. This time, the medicines included a special preparation for Mohammed Majid's daughter, who suffered from headaches. This medicine was taken only once each week and left the girl free from pain. Dobara was also successful with a new medicine for Ali Hassan's backache and was pleased to receive a gift in return, a tin whistle fashioned by Ali Hassan himself, on which the maker played God Save the Queen. He had heard the tune on Sayyid Ali's radio during the Olympic Games of 1960.
Mohammed Hussein and Dobara, the Englishman, climbed into the high mountains on the first day of the last month of summer. They intended to be away for as long as 4 weeks and had to carry their food for that time, but not water. Springs ran from the mountain in many places. The Englishman had purchased a sleeping bag for Mohammed Hussein and also a 2-man tent of great strength. Mohammed Hussein carried a rifle too, not to endanger the lives of snow leopards, but to shoot such small game as he could find on the return journey, hares above all. It was a handsome weapon, greatly valued by Mohammed Hussein, a Mosin Nagant 7.62 sniper rifle with special sight, more powerful than the Englishman's biggest camera. It had been in his possession for only a year. On a visit to the mechanics market in Herat to find parts for his diesel generators, Mohammed Hussein had been approached by a Russian soldier looking for vodka, which was not for sale in Afghanistan. It happened that Mohammed Hussein knew a Kurdish Christian of the city whose brother smuggled unbottled vodka from Pakistan, and he was able to trade him 10 liters of the alcohol for the Mosin Nagant. He had no use for the rifle at that time, but if the bribes he was required to pay to keep his business running should become too much for him to afford, he could join the Mujahideen of the North and earn a bounty on Russian officers above the rank of captain. The Mujahideen could fire their weapons with accuracy over short and middle distances, but long-distance sniping was beyond their skill.
Your Russian soldier might end up being shot with his own rifle, said the Englishman, but he did not mean it as a joke. No, no, said Mohammed Hussein. His captain would put him in prison for losing his rifle, or make him guard the road in the Northeast. The soldiers who guard the roads in the Northeast survive only for 3 days.
The lower slopes of the mountains were dotted with hardy trees and bushes, such as highland cedars. These did not grow to any great height, but held fiercely to the soil with roots like the talons of eagles. Junipers grew among the rocks, fighting a battle for survival against the creatures that grazed on their foliage. Wildflowers of many types grew close to channels and rivulets, and in any place where soil still remained. Muhammad Hussein called over his shoulder the names of the wildflowers in Dari, and Dobara, who had a knowledge of plants, replied with the names in English: Oriental poppy, rose of Jericho, a resurrection plant, Aaron's beard, Artemisia, and small yellow blooms known both in English and my language of Dari as prophet's flower.
Mohammed Hussein spoke about the sky too, and of the importance of watching it every minute. He said, see the small cloud by itself over to the east, Mr. Ibrahim? That cloud is a spy. It looks over the mountains to see what mischief can be made. Soon it will vanish, and then we must be careful. Storms come into the mountains with no warning. Here is some more advice, Mr. Ibrahim. Ibrahim, you must stop and put your hand on a rock every half of an hour after 10 o'clock in the morning. Your hand will tell you how much heat is in the sun. If the rock is too warm at midday for your hand to stay for more than 1 minute, you must rest in the shade. Mr. Ibrahim, when you climb a mountain in Hazara, it is like a battle in a war. The mountain is not your friend. It is your enemy. It wants to kill you. We are going to a place that is full of jealousy. The mountain does not want you there. So many dangers.
After 2 hours of climbing, the Englishman and the hunter crossed loose shale and outcrops of rock without a tree in sight. The Englishman, Dobara, was strong and lean and knew how to climb, but he marveled at the skill of Muhammad Hussein. He said in Dari, "You place your feet like a goat," to which the hunter replied, "My father was of the race of goats."
The pack each climber carried rose high above the head. Often when he used his cameras, the Englishman had to set his pack down to give himself freedom of movement. One of these times, his pack unbalanced from the boulder on which he left it, rolling down the mountain further than the length of a tall tree. Mohammed Hussein said, "Wait," and removed his own pack and ran down the slope to retrieve Dobara's. Running down the slope was all very well for a man so sure-footed, but Mohammed Hussein then ran back up the slope with the pack on his shoulders. The Englishman, watching in amazement, realized that Mohammed Hussein was keeping pace with him out of courtesy and could make much quicker progress if he wished.
3 hours of climbing took the two men into the cold zone, where the frozen air from the snowy peaks rolled down the slopes, even if there was no wind to drive it. Whenever the Englishman moved out of the bright sunshine to find a path between boulders, he felt the deep chill of the air and would go from being bathed in sweat to shivers in the space of a minute. Muhammad Hussein said, "When you rest at this height, go into the shade, but not into the hollows, or you will freeze."
Below them, the valley revealed its strange shape, a long, narrow neck, opening to a deep bowl like a musical instrument known as the tambour. And indeed, the valley was called the tambour. It was green all along its length, with terraces climbing the slopes of the bowl. Mohammed Hussein told Dobara that the Hazara were compelled by cruel circumstances to use every piece of land they could and had become masters of living on rock. Hazara went into the mountains many ages ago, he said. They came here to find safety from their enemies. Now they make their farms in every valley where soil remains. Where there is no soil, they bring it from valleys where the sun doesn't reach and make gardens in the sunny places. Hazara can find a way to live where a mouse could not survive.
At dusk, Muhammad Hussein led the way to a cave he knew well. The two men cleared the floor of fallen rocks and spread out their sleeping bags. The cave had a high roof and ran deep into the mountain. Muhammad Hussein said the bears had lived at the back of the cave in past times, but no longer. The bears are gone from the mountain. Why is that? The Englishman said. I shot them, said Muhammad Hussein.
At the back of the cave, Muhammad Hussein had stored firewood many years earlier when he was a hunter by profession, and the wood remained where he'd left it. The firewood had been chosen carefully, he explained. It burnt with great heat and it burnt slowly. He built a fire from the entrance to the cave and made a meal of lamb and rice. He intended to use the fresh meat first before it spoiled.
The Englishman asked Muhammad Hussein, "Are you not surprised to find the wood here after all these years?" "No," said Muhammad Hussein. "It's my wood and my family's. No one would touch it. Wood in the high mountains is like water in the desert. It always belongs to someone. I have 2 more caves on the mountain. In each, I will find firewood."
They ate the rice and lamb sitting close to the fire. Night had fallen very quickly. Looking out from where he sat, Dobara could see the moon in the east, many times bigger than he'd ever known it and shining gold. He asked Muhammad Hussein, "Do snow leopards live in caves like this?" And Muhammad Hussein shook his head and smiled.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Where the snow leopards sleep, no one knows, Mr. Ibrahim. Really? No one knows? It is a secret of the animals themselves. I have tracked the leopards as carefully as a fox and seen them vanish into the ground. We know they sleep. We know they make a home for their cubs. But where they do this, they are too clever to reveal. This mountain on which we find ourselves, Mr. Ibrahim, I know this mountain as well as anyone in this world knows the land he has crossed and recrossed all his life. If you put a hood over my head, I could lead you safely to the summit. Have no doubt of that. But I am like a man who has read the Holy Book 1,000 times and knows it by heart, and yet can still learn much more from a great scholar. The leopards are like great scholars, and their Holy Book is the mountain.
Muhammad Hussein answered question after question from the Englishman as the night deepened. Finally, he said, "Now you can tell me stories of England." Before he climbed into his sleeping bag, the hunter built a small wall of rocks a short distance from the mouth of the cave. "This wall is to keep you in the night if you wish to relieve your bowels or your bladder," said Muhammad Hussein. "Take a torch, but remember, when you come to the wall, you can only go a little way more, or you will fall down the mountain and the bears will eat you."
"But you said that the bears are gone," said the Englishman. "Then the ghosts of the bears will come and take you to a strange place. They will know you are my friend and they will keep you to punish me. Tell me a story of England."
Dobara began a story about the tall buildings of London and of the great cathedral of St. Paul's, but this wasn't what Muhammad Hussein wished to hear. So Dobara instead told the story of football and of his team called Millwall. Muhammad Hussein knew about football, and it gave him pleasure to learn about Millwall and also Liverpool, of which he had heard.
In the night, the mountain made sounds like a living creature. At times, the sounds seemed those of a musical instrument with a deep voice. As he listened, the Englishman began to believe that his mount was talking to other mountains because he heard more distant sounds responding. But he said to himself, such a thing is impossible.
In the morning, Dobara left his sleeping bag to look for Muhammad Hussein, who had roused himself earlier. Outside the cave beyond the wall that Muhammad Hussein had built, the Englishman gazed at the beauty around him. To the east, taller mountains stood against the blue sky as if in pride. On one peak, the morning sun picked out the glitter of snow, and as Dobara watched, a tall cloud passed under the sun, and the shadow traveled swiftly down the mountain. Under the shadow, the snow changed color from white to blue.
Muhammad Hussein appeared within a few minutes carrying his prayer rug. He greeted Dobara in the language spoken in London. Good morning, sir. Good morning to Millwall.
Go ahead.
Muhammad Hussein worked patiently to bring the embers of the fire to life. Once he had a flame, he added tiny fragments of dry grass, then splinters, then fragments of wood no bigger than a man's finger, and at last lengths of wood as thick as a child's wrist. In the center of the fire sat a round stone, a bread-making stone. Muhammad Hussein mixed flour and water and salt and white pepper into dough. Before flattening the dough on the hot stone, he added a small amount of brown powder from a cloth bag. Herbs? Asked the Englishman. Muhammad Hussein said, smell. Dobara put his nose to the opening of the cloth bag. Blood came rushing to his brain. Bloody hell, he said. What is it? Something for climbing the mountain, said Muhammad Hussein.
Like a stimulant of some kind, right? The climbing on the second day was not straight up the mountain, but a slow circling well below the peak that made the Englishmen think they were losing ground. Muhammad Hussein saw him looking puzzled and explained to him that if they made a direct climb at this point, the eagles in the sky would reveal to the leopards the presence of danger. When the eagles see humans, they climb higher, out of the range of a rifle. The leopards understand this. If a leopard is out hunting, he will find his den and stay inside for 3 days, 4 days. He cannot find our scent because the wind raises it, takes it down the valley. But he watches the birds and he listens to the rocks. If he becomes suspicious, we will never see him, even if he is no further away than your shadow.
In the middle of the afternoon, Muhammad Hussein found a great boulder on the mountainside and climbed to its top. He sat with his eyes closed for a long time, perhaps as long as 30 minutes. The Englishman did not interrupt him, but he felt worried. After all, it was a big task to find a snow leopard on such a huge mountain. He gazed away to the east at the snow peaks, wishing that his wife in London was with him to see the beauty of the land. He was away from her too much.
When Muhammad Hussein came down from the boulder, he did so in a hurry. He said, "Be quick, follow me." The Englishman, full of worry even more than before, pulled on his pack and followed the hunter, who was climbing more swiftly than ever, too swiftly for him to keep pace. "Muhammad Hussein," he called, "I haven't the strength." The hunter threw off his pack and climbed down to Dobara. He pulled off the Englishman's pack, unstrapped it, and began fitting it in a smaller pack he'd brought with him. When the smaller pack was full, he said, "Hurry." Muhammad Hussein now carried 2 packs, one on his back and one hanging from his neck. Without any knowledge of the emergency, the Englishman's thoughts tortured him, but with his lighter pack, he found the strength to keep up with Muhammad Hussein, his breath whistling from his mouth. The speed at which Muhammad Hussein moved was frightening. Even more to the west, the Englishman was desperate to know, even more than to rest. The Englishman was desperate to know the cause of such haste, because he could see nothing that might make Muhammad Hussein race up the mountain in the way he did. When he found a scrap of breath to cry out, "What is it, for God's sake?" the hunter shouted. "Don't talk."
And then Dabara had no need to guess at the cause of Muhammad Hussein's great haste, for the answer came down on him in the form of a shadow. Overhead, the blue sky was being devoured by a rolling black cloud that stretched across the horizon. The storm came unlike any storm the Englishman had ever seen, not even in the lands of South America, where he had taken his cameras in years past. The first gust of wind pushed him forward onto his hands and knees, and in the few seconds it took him to find his feet again, a darkness as deep as evening had had overtaken the mountain. The rain came down like the waters of a cataract. Before Dabara's eyes, the path on which he was walking became a rapidly flowing stream. The wind seized hold of him and tumbled him first one way, then another. With the burden of his pack, he no sooner won the struggle to be upright than he was thrown down again.
Muhammad Hussein, he cried out. Muhammad Hussein. His voice was overwhelmed by the roar of the wind. As heavy as the rain had been, it became much heavier still. He heard rocks crashing around him, picked up by the force of the torrent, and rolled down the mountain. He thought, "Dear God, I'll be crushed." His fear almost became his fate, for he felt a rock strike his knee like the blow of a hammer. He fell and tumbled, reaching blindly with his hands. He screamed in his fear, "Muhammad Hussein, please, Muhammad Hussein." He raised his hand to shield himself from a shape above him and found his hand grasped, found himself lifted to his feet. Muhammad Hussein shouted into his ear, "Put your weight against me. Even if I fall, keep hold." Dobara, poor man, could not make sense of what he was told, but he held on with all his strength to Muhammad Hussein's arm. Pebbles and grit carried by the wind struck his face whenever he looked up. He was certain that both he and Muhammad Hussein would die on the mountain, and he wished to surrender. But the hunter wrenched him forward into the face of the storm.
Muhammad Hussein was not striving in this way without purpose. He found the opening to the cave he was seeking and pushed the Englishman through it. Dabara knew only that he was drenched and bruised, but safe at last. In the darkness, the two men drew their breath and listened to the tumult outside. Muhammad Hussein lit 4 candles from his pack, and the flames shone in the curtain of water that covered the entrance.
For some minutes, neither man said a word, but watched in wonder the patterns of light dancing over the roof and walls of the cave. Then Muhammad Hussein, sitting with his legs crossed, began to sing, and not softly, but with the full force of his voice. "Sing," he roared, "sing to thank God."
Only one song came to Dabara. It was the song of his team, the Lions of Millwall, called "Let 'Em Come." He sang it as loudly as Muhammad Hussein, or even louder. The words of the song were all to do with the victories of his football team, but in his mind, he was praising all the gods of the world.
The storm lasted for 2 hours. In this time, Muhammad Hussein and Dabara removed their wet clothes and wrapped their sleeping bags around themselves. They ate food from tins since it was only the afternoon, and Muhammad Hussein hadn't yet lit a fire. Dabara asked Muhammad Hussein, "Do you have such storms every year?" "No," said Muhammad Hussein. "Only twice before have I seen a storm like this. The last time was in the years of Shah Zahir. Last night when we slept in the cave, I thought one mountain was talking to another as if they were angry. Is that possible?" Muhammad Hussein laughed and clapped his hands together. "You heard the mountains talking, Mr. Ibrahim?" Now Dabara felt embarrassed. It was like they were talking. Muhammad Hussein laughed again. "Mr. Abraham, the mountain is made of rock. It cannot talk." "No, of course not," said Dabara. "It was my imagination." He was blushing.
Muhammad Hussein must have thought the talking mountain a very great joke, because he laughed again and again and shook his head and said, "A talking mountain? No, no, Mr. Ibrahim." Late in the afternoon, when the storm had moved far away and the water had stopped showering over the mouth of the cave, Muhammad Hussein and the Englishman put on dry clothes and stepped outside. The sky was blue once more and the sun blazed on its journey to the west. Water still ran over the ground beneath the feet of the two men, but not in torrents. High above, 2 eagles flew in circles. Will the storm frighten the snow leopards? Asked the Englishman. Will they stay in their dens for a long time? No, said Mohammed Hussein. The sun has returned. They will hunt.
Enough wood was stored in the back of the cave for a big fire. Mohammed Hussein held his wet clothes and those of the Englishman above the flames to dry them. The Englishman offered to help, but Mohammed Hussein refused, saying, "Take some pictures outside. Take a picture of the talking mountain." Dobara stepped outside the cave with his camera into the cool air of late afternoon. No sooner had he lifted his camera to his eye than a great roar sounded overhead, the sound of jet engines. Mohammed Hussein came out of the cave and looked up at the sky to the east. Trouble was written on his face. He aimed his rifle at the jet planes, now almost directly overhead. "Are you going to shoot at the planes?" asked Dobara. He could see that the aircraft were fighter bombers. "Is that sensible?" "Russians!" cried Mohammed Hussein, shouting above the roar. "Yes, but why shoot at them?" When the jet planes had disappeared from the sky and the roar had died away, Mohammed Hussein said, "Do you think I would shoot the airplanes? No, I was looking through my sight. These airplanes drop bombs."
Here? Why? The Russians don't fight in the Hazara. No, not here, said Mohammed Hussein. They're going to Herat. My friend, a catastrophe has overtaken our search for the leopards. I must go home to Herat. Even as he spoke, Mohammed Hussein had begun to pack. The Englishman's heart turned over in his chest. Such was his disappointment. "But we are so close." "Pack," said Mohammed Hussein. "I will take you down the mountain." "But why? I don't understand." Will tell you as we return. Be quick, Mr. Ibrahim." "I will stay." "No, that is not possible. It is a disgrace if I leave you on the mountain alone. You saw the storm. The mountain has many more tricks like that." "You said the mountain is made of stone. How can a pile of stones have tricks?"
But Mohammed, go ahead.
But Mohammed Hussein was not listening. He made Dobara pack, leaving the fire smoldering. The Englishman's heart was broken.
They descended the mountain at twice the speed at which they climbed it. The Englishman was always behind. He cried out many times, "Mohammed Hussein, I have no rest." But Mohammed Hussein wouldn't stop. Finally, Dobara burst into tears and sat down with his head in his hands. And this time, Mohammed Hussein put down his pack and walked back to the Englishman. He said, "Mr. Abraham, I am sorry. We will rest."
He found cool water in the spring and filled a cup for the Englishman. Then he opened a tin of peaches and told Dobara to eat them. This kindness did not stop Dobara's tears. Mohammed Hussein tried to explain, "Mr. Ibrahim, my family is in danger. Do you understand? The Russian airplanes, they were going to Herat to drop bombs. When I left Herat, Ismail Khan ruled the city. He took it away from the Russians, but now the Russians are returning. They will drop bombs everywhere. I know what they are like. My wife, my children, I fear for them. I fear for all the people of Herat. Listen to me. I will come back to this mountain with you. I will come back in winter if you wish. I will find the leopards for you. Do you believe me?"
Dobara did not believe him, but he said yes. He did not believe he would ever see a snow leopard outside of a zoo. He understood the need to come down from the mountain, and yet his disappointment was so great that he found it hard to think of the people of Herat and their danger. He felt ashamed to confess such a thing to himself. When Mohammed Hussein started the journey down again, the Englishman stayed with him. He thought, "I only want a picture. That's nothing. May this good man's family be safe."
He went back to his own country, the Englishman, and reported to people at his university that he had failed to photograph the snow leopard. He was told, "Your friend was right. The Russians have invaded Herat." He waited with great anxiety to hear from Mohammed Hussein, who had promised to send him a letter. But even if a letter had come, the Englishman's wife had forbidden him to return to Afghanistan. Such was the danger now that civil war was raging.
Even if he could return to Hazara, just to hear of Mohammed Hussein's safety and that of his family would have been a blessing. But Abraham's wait for the letter from Muhammad Hussein was a long one of 4 years. In that time, he sent many letters of his own to the address Muhammad Hussein had given him, and spent many hours at the Afghan embassy in South Kensington trying to find information about the situation in Herat. In those 4 years, snow leopards had been photographed by others in India and Nepal. Abraham had missed his chance, but his disappointment did not last forever. His wife gave birth to a boy and then to a girl. Instead of traveling with his camera, Abraham stayed all year long at his university and taught students about the endangered creatures of the world.
The letter that arrived from Afghanistan after those 4 years was not from Muhammad Hussein, but from his son, Rasul Ali. The letter was written in English and it told of sorrowful news. Muhammad Hussein had been dead almost from the time of his return to Herat. Dear Mr. Ibrahim, has my father, Muhammad Hussein Anwari, spoke of me to you. I am Rasul Ali Anwar, the second son of my father after Camille Ali Anwari, who taught children in the Hazara school of Herat, not far from the tomb of the poet Jami. My father, Muhammad Hussein Anwari, was killed by hanging. It is my sadness to tell you. I have not been able to write this letter to you before this day because I've been hiding with the soldiers of Ismail Khan. The Russian soldiers have gone from Herat now, and I am safe. I will tell you, with your permission, of my father's death by the Russian soldiers. It happened that the Russians came to our house in Sheikh Ismail 2 days after my father returned from Hazara. The soldiers went to many houses, and in each house they did painful things to people. One man in Sheikh Ismail said, Muhammad Hussein has a gun. It was not his fault to say this because the soldiers made him say it. The soldiers found my father's gun in our house, and it was a Russian gun. The captain of the soldiers said that my father had killed a Russian soldier and stolen his gun. For punishment, my father was hanged by the soldiers in the doorway of our house, and my brother, Camille Ali, was hanged too. The soldiers would like to hang me, but I escaped and hid myself with the soldiers of Ismail Khan. Mr. Ibrahim, when my father came back to Herat from Hazara, he was very sad that he did not find a leopard animal for you in the mountains for your pictures. Mr. Ibrahim, if you are still looking for a leopard animal for your pictures, I will take you to Hazara. This will be my honor.
Abraham shook his head in sorrow at the news of his friend's death. He had thought that a man like Muhammad Hussein, so strong, would live into old age. It seemed a disgrace to the nation of Russia and a disgrace to the world itself that a man like his friend should be hanged in his own doorway. Abraham showed the letter to his wife, remembering, we walked on the mountain and I told him the names of the wildflowers in English. He called me Mr. Ibrahim. He wanted me to teach him the Millwall song, you know. I wish I had.
You want to meet this Rasul Ali, don't you? You want to go back to Afghanistan, replied Abraham's wife, Sophie. Very much. Abraham's wife was silent for a minute or more. Then she said, the war is over. Go if it's safe.
Letters were written, arrangements were made. Abraham's university gave him leave of absence for 6 weeks. In the summer of the year 1990, Abraham returned to Hazarachat and met Rasul Ali Anwari in the village of Chakar near I don't know how to say that one, Dar-e-Awd. Rasul Ali was taller than his father, but he did not look as powerful. Indeed, Rasul Ali was more of a scholar than a hunter, as his father had been. He taught in the same school as his brother Camille Ali had before Camille's death. He said, my father did not want us to hunt or fight. He said, in Afghanistan, if you pick up a gun, you will never put it down. When I hid with Ismail Khan's soldiers, I dressed wounds and cooked rice. He also confessed that he had never seen a snow leopard alive and did not know the secrets of the mountain. He wanted to keep his father's promise to Abraham for the sake of honor.
So when Abraham and Rasul Ali set off up the mountain in the summer to find a snow leopard, it was Abraham who led the way. And it was Abraham who said, watch the sky and put your hand on a rock to test the heat of the sun. It was Abraham who told the story of the cloud that spied for the storm to come. And it was Rasul Ali who said, you walk so fast.
You walk so fast. At the end of the second day, Abraham searched for the cave that had saved him and Rasul Ali's father when the storm came from the east. He found it only when he glimpsed an empty tin left behind 5 years ago. In the cave that night, he lit a fire on the ashes of Muhammad Hussein's fire and told the story of the storm. When he had finished, Rasul Ali told his own story of his father. He stayed home in winter if he could, but in summer and spring he went to the north. In autumn, he traveled to Kurdistan for bears. Once in Kurdistan, someone asked him to shoot a bandit, a very cruel man who had killed many people for money. My father said no. I asked him if it was worse to kill a man than a bear or a leopard. He said it was not worse, but he would not kill any man or any animal if it gave him pleasure. To shoot the bandit would have pleased him too much. He carried with him a piece of the tomb of a Sufi who had gone to heaven on golden wings 100 years after he was buried. When he killed an animal, he would take the piece of stone from its bag and kiss it to show that the killing had given him no pleasure. Do you know, Mr. Ibrahim, my father shot a Russian captain in Herat who was beating a mullah with a chain in Burmagan near the mosque. That was before he met you in Hazara. But he was sorrowful. He said, I will pay one day. And he did. Rasul Ali showed the piece of stone from the tomb of the Sufi. It was marble with a red vein running through it. Abraham held it in his palm. He asked Rasul Ali if he might kiss it to honor Muhammad Hussein. Rasul Ali said, of course.
After 4 days, the Englishmen and Rasul Ali were as high on the mountain as they dared to go. Patches of snow lay on the ground in places where the sun could not reach. Up until this fourth day, the two men had followed a path upwards and around, or not so path, as a way forward that could not be mistaken. But now the mountain became a place of ridges and ravines, impossible to scale or cross without climbing equipment. It became clear to the Englishman that his quest was foolish. Rasul Ali had no experience of the mountain, and no knowledge of snow leopards. He had come to honor his father's promise, but it was Muhammad Hussein himself who was needed.
Abraham, the leader against his will, found the only place at this height where a tent could be safely raised. With no cave to shelter them, the two men were prepared for the night ahead. The tent was held firmly to the ground with steel pegs hammered to a depth of 15 centimeters. But even so, the strength of the wind in the night was enough to make the two men fear that they would be hurled down the mountain in the darkness.
Rasul Ali said to Abraham, if we live through this night, I will pray at the mosque in Herat for 10 days and keep a pebble in my shoe for 6 months. Yes, and if we live through this night, I will walk to Herat beside you in my bare feet. No, you must do something for your God, for the God of the Jews. Abraham,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Abraham thought for a minute, then said, I'll attend my brother-in-law's Seder 2 nights in a row. But believe me, that's doing a lot for God.
The morning was so bright and the sky so blue that the two men reconsidered their fears and decided to stay another night. After Rasul Ali's prayers and then breakfast, they climbed a little higher, leaving the tent and their packs where they were. They reached a place where they could look east, north, and south, with only the western view hidden from them. The sun stood in the sky so fresh in its beauty, they may have been the first day of its life among the planets. To the east, a chain of mountain peaks, each higher than the other, gleamed with the snows that remained for the whole of summer, and for the whole of the year. Of all the earth, no greater wonder could be imagined. It seemed as if the world itself was saying to the Englishman and to the Hazara, to Abraham and Ruzal Ali, remember this.
But when the day had passed, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
But when the day had passed and the two men huddled in their tent once more, the wind howled as if in anger. And Rasul Ali and Abraham swore again that they would hurry down the mountain the next day. I have 3 children and a wife who's dear to me. I think I must return to them, said Rasul Ali. Sophie will worry every day I am gone. Yes, we must go back tomorrow, agreed the Englishman. Then Rasul Ali spoke clearly. I do not believe we will ever find a leopard.
Abraham responded, if your father were here, maybe, but neither you nor I have the skill. And yet they stayed one more day, and one more day still, and another and another. It was not the beauty of the mornings alone that kept them on the mountain. Each man spoke of a feeling that the journey down the mountain was not yet right, not yet ready for him. At one point, Abraham said to Rasul Ali, if a storm such as the one that came down on your father and me blew in from the east now, we would die. We would promise each other to go tomorrow. We must promise each other to go tomorrow, no matter what we feel.
The next day dawned, but the reluctance to leave was still strong, and so the 2 men remained. They didn't search for a snow leopard, but only spoke of their children and their wives and of how much each wife, Sophie and Fatima, would worry. Rasul Ali told Abraham of the Russians in Herat. Abraham told Rasul Ali of his adventures in South America when he was photographing tapirs.
Of the Russians, Rasul Ali had this to say, the soldiers are very young. They hate Afghanistan and wish to go home to their own country. The first thing they think of is killing. It is their answer to every problem. They drink alcohol all the time and put needles in their arms. Mr. Ibrahim, they killed my father, but I feel sorry for them truly in my heart. Ismail Shah's soldiers killed many of the Russian soldiers and many of the soldiers of the communists in Kabul. Mr. Ibrahim, I am sorry to say that they made them die in painful ways, in cruel ways. I was excused from watching because I only dressed wounds and cooked rice. Now the Russians have gone and they accomplished nothing. Many thousands of Herati died, as well as many thousands of Communist Army soldiers and many thousands of Russians. Like water poured on the ground in the desert. The water is a waste, and in 2 minutes it has disappeared into the sand. The Herati disappeared, the Russian soldiers disappeared, the Afghan soldiers of the Communist Army, they disappeared too, all into the sand. It was a waste and a tragedy.
The morning of the 10th day on the mountain began with the sound of a human voice outside the tent. Rasul Ali lifted his head out of his sleeping bag in alarm, and his alarm was greater when he saw Abraham looking back at him. The Englishman had put on his spectacles. What in the Prophet's holy name is that, Rasul Ali?
The voice, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
The voice.
seemed...
You go ahead.
Please, you go, Stephen.
No, it's yours.
The voice seemed that of a man speaking as if in confidence to another, a low voice and gentle. Rasul Ali, listening closely, could not make out a single word, yet he was sure the voice was speaking Dari. Then the voice broke into laughter.
Rasul Ali scrambled to the opening of the tent, drew down the zipper and thrust his head outside. In the gray light of morning, before the sun had appeared over the mountain, he saw nothing but the sky and the rocks. Both men crawled outside the tent and stood in the dawn light, looking this way and that. Who's there? Abraham called, not loudly. He called again, this time in Dari. No answer came, and there was no one to be seen who could have answered. Each man held the hand of the other, as if amazement had made them frightened children for the moment. Abraham said at last, it was the wind. Can the wind laugh? Said Rasul Ali. They remained silent for some time, as long as 10 minutes, and at that time they barely moved. Then Abraham became aware that he was clasping Ruzal Ali's hand, and in embarrassment he released it. The sun had lifted its face above the mountains of the east, and the snow peaks glittered as if each mountain were capped with gems. It was a windless dawn, and indeed the night itself had been still and calm. Giant shadows lay on the slopes of the eastern mountains below the radiance of the peaks. As the Englishman and Ruzal Ali watched, the shadows were overtaken by the golden glow of the rising sun.
Abraham went to the tent for his camera for the sake of some final pictures of the mountain peaks. Neither man had said so, but each knew that this 10th day was surely the day of return. After the pictures of the eastern peaks, Abraham photographed Ruzal Ali standing beside the tent. Then he placed his camera on a stand with 3 legs and turned a dial that would permit him 8 seconds to take his position beside Ruzal Ali before the camera came to life. The 2 men stood smiling with arms around each other's shoulders, while the camera, as if in the hands of a ghost, opened its eye for an instant and made a picture of all that it saw.
The journey down the mountain was made in only 3 days. At the village of Chakar, Abraham and Ruzal Ali stayed the night in the house of the headman, Najaf Husseini, who bred each year the finest goats of Hazara, and who did not believe in such an animal as a snow leopard. The next day, Abraham and Ruzal Ali traveled by horse and cart to a place known only as Taxi, 2 houses on the track that led to the great highway. The town of Taxi was occupied by one family, that of a man who owned an ancient Cadillac automobile that carried passengers to the bus stop on the great highway. The man was also called Taxi, although his true name was Abbas Dai Chupman. All around the 2 houses of the town lay the ruins of many vehicles that Taxi had collected over the years, trucks and limousines, the shells of armored vehicles, even the skeleton of a helicopter. All of these vehicles had been damaged in the long civil war and abandoned in the wilderness.
On the way to the Great Highway, Ruzal Ali and Abraham agreed that the true reward of the expedition to find the snow leopard had been the friendship they had found. Ruzal Ali made a gift of his father's Sufi stone with its red vein. The most valuable thing that Abraham had to offer was the gold badge that commemorated a famous victory of the Lions of Millwall. He gave the gold badge to Ruzal Ali and taught him the song of Millwall, "Let 'em Come," translated into Dari. At the Great Highway, Ruzal Ali took the bus to Herat, while Abraham, after a wait of 10 hours, took another bus to Kabul.
The house in which Abraham Lew lived with his wife and children was in the suburb of Bermondsey. He and Sophie had lived there before the time of their children. In those years, Abraham had a room set aside for the making of photographs, but when the first baby was expected, the room became a nursery. If Abraham wished to make pictures, he instead went to the laboratory of his university. It was there that he made pictures from those he had taken in Hazara, 300 altogether. It was all done by a machine.
Abraham took the pictures home after no more than a glance, intending to share them with his wife. When the 2 children had been put to bed that evening, he sat at the table in his kitchen with Sophie and passed one picture after another to her. He said, "That's Shakar. You can see the market. You can see the figs. And the sunsets were the most beautiful I have seen." Finally, he said, "This is Ruzal Ali praying on the mountain. He didn't mind me taking pictures. The water bottle is for wudu." When he came to the pictures of the 10th morning on the mountain, he explained, "Me and Ruzal Ali outside our tent. I took it with the timer."
Sophie looked at the picture with her head to one side, musing. "But you told me you never found a snow leopard."
Oh my goodness.
"It's true, we didn't. Why do you ask?" Sophie passed him the picture. At first, he could see only himself and Ruzal Ali smiling in front of their red tent, each dressed in jeans and yellow waterproof jackets from a shop in Oxford Street. With his dark beard, he and Ruzal Ali could almost have been taken for brothers. The picture captured some of that morning's blue sky and also the steep wall of clay-colored sedimentary rock behind the tent in which fragments of marble could be found. Look, said Sophie, tapping the photograph with her finger.
On the ledge of the steep wall, high above the tent, a snow leopard lay at ease in the morning sun, head raised, thick tail curled. So closely did the coat of the leopard blend with the rock that the animal could easily be overlooked. But snow leopards, as Abraham knew, were the most cautious beasts in all the cat family, the most secretive. It seemed impossible that this snow leopard could lie in the sun in such a relaxed way while humans walked and talked 20 meters below.
That could never happen, he said. He walked over to the window and held the picture up to the light, since there was still color in the summer sky, even at 7 o'clock. But how could daylight change the picture, change what was true? It was a snow leopard, and it gazed down at the scene below, at Abraham and Rosal Ali, at the camera itself, as if it were a close friend of the two men, as if it were as close a friend of the two men as they were to each other. I have never seen you so amazed, said Sophie.
Abraham shook his head, but now he too was smiling. A snow leopard? What
No,
sort
it's not a question. It's an
a
explanation.
snow leopard? Exclamation.
Right.
What sort of morning was that in Hazara? A morning of laughter outside the tent, a morning of jewels sparkling on mountaintops.
Darling, a picture.
A picture can't lie, said Sophie.
So I thought you'd like that. I
That
saw you
is.
suck in your breath when you realized what happened. I told you it's the most perfect possible ending for that story. Right?
It was a great surprise.
Yeah.
I'll stop our recording. How lovely.
Yeah.